What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 5 reasons why you should buy the Cricket Icon 4. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So my first reason why you should buy the Cricket Icon 4 is the large display. Now with this phone, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So on one hand, while the image quality is pretty mediocre for what it is, I still do think it's pretty decent. I mean, despite only having a 720p resolution, everything does look decently sharp, and the IPS LCD is giving us some nice colors. So in general, while not being nearly as good as a much higher end device, it's still pretty decent. But that being said, the good thing about this display, especially for this kind of price range, is the size and dimensions. At 6.5 inches, while not being the largest display out there, it's definitely on the larger side. So if you're consuming a lot of content, like watching videos, playing games, or maybe just browsing the web and using social media, no matter what you're doing, you will get a pretty decent experience here. And with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching a video in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like reading or browsing the web, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, while on one hand, of course, a 6.5-inch display is really not uncommon compared to a lot of phones in this price range, like the 5.5-inch Cricket Debut Smart or the 6.1-inch TCL 30Z. For again, a really entry-level phone, the Cricket Icon 4 definitely does have a good sized display. My second reason why you should buy the Cricket Icon 4 is the newer software. Now with this phone, we are getting Android 12, and granted, we are pretty much on Android 13 at this point. So if you want the absolute latest version of Android, then this is probably still not going to be quite good enough for you. But that being said, considering this is a really entry-level phone, a lot of phones in this price range, or even a little bit above, like the Cricket Dream 5G for example, which is still being sold as of the recording of this video, a lot of those phones only have Android 11. So with this phone, seeing that we are getting at least a decently newer version of Android is definitely a nice thing. So if you are looking for a really entry-level phone, and maybe you don't need the absolute latest version of Android, but you still want something at least a little bit newer, then the Cricket Icon 4 with Android 12 will be a pretty decent choice for this price range. My third reason to buy the Cricket Icon 4 is the security features. Now with this phone, we are getting Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the back. And while of course, compared to the general Android phone market, this is really not uncommon by any means, a lot of phones around this $100 or less price range either have one or the other, or sometimes neither at all. Like for example, going back to the Cricket Debut Smart and the TCL 30Z, both of these phones are sold on Cricket for around the same price as the Cricket Icon 4, and neither of them have fingerprint scanners. To be fair, they at least have Face Unlock. But the point here is, while having both Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner is more of an expectation in a higher price range for really low-end phones like these, it is definitely nice that we're getting both options. But that being said, let's go ahead and give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go. One more time. And there we go. So as you can see, it was real fast and responsive, no issues at all. So in general, if you are looking for an entry-level phone like this that has more than one option to unlock the phone besides a pin, then the Cricket Icon 4 is going to be a pretty good choice. My fourth reason to buy the Cricket Icon 4 is the battery. Now with this phone, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10-watt fast charging. So on one hand, a 4000 mAh battery is of course not quite 5000. So if you really want the absolute best battery you can get, you can still do better. But honestly, in this price range, considering this phone is about $100, there really aren't too many phones in this exact price range, if any, that have 5000 mAh batteries. Off the top of my head, I could think of the Samsung Galaxy A03s, but that phone is a little bit more expensive than this. So in general, if you do want a really affordable phone, but you also want to make sure you have pretty good battery life, then the Cricket Icon 4 is going to be a pretty good choice. With a 4000 mAh battery, this is definitely not a small battery by any means. In fact, lots of flagship phones like iPhones, for example, even have smaller batteries than this. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you need a phone that's really going to last all day, in that kind of situation, this phone is going to be a pretty good choice. And with 10-watt fast charging, even though this isn't the best fast charging in the world, in my experience, the charging speeds are pretty good, so you most likely won't have to worry about that either. And finally, my fifth reason to buy the Cricket Icon 4 is because it has NFC. Now this is probably the most pleasantly surprising feature about this phone, because since it does have NFC, excluding those carrier deals where you can get something for free, I think this is actually the cheapest phone I've ever seen that has this feature. Now in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services, so if you like to use tap and pay, you will need a phone that has NFC. And unfortunately, with phones I want to say under $200. NFC is definitely not something you're typically going to find. So with this phone, seeing that again, this is like a $100 phone, I personally got it for around $60. It's definitely real nice to see we're actually getting this feature. So if you are looking for a really affordable entry-level phone, but you also want to make sure you can use tap and pay, the Cricket Icon 4 is probably going to be one of your best options. But those were my 5 reasons to buy the Cricket Icon 4. On one hand, you really kind of get what you pay for here, because seeing as this is really a $100 entry-level phone, there aren't really a ton of features, but I feel like for the right situation, if you're really just looking for something for basic activities and you're not really a heavy user or anything like that, I do think for that kind of situation, the Cricket Icon 4 is actually going to be a pretty good choice. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.